Hello again, folks. John Billigan here once again to bring you one of the most disturbing cases on this podcast yet. I will warn listeners in advance that this one is not for the faint of heart. Tonight's cases take place in Devil's Lake State Park, out in Baraboo, Wisconsin. Normally, I'd give updates on previous cases, but in the interest of getting into things, I'll just go ahead and begin tonight's case and save the updates for after. So, without further ado, we present Case 9, It Bleeds Their Sorrows. Hello there, James. Feel free to begin when you're ready.
Okay. Forgive me. I'm a tad shaken. I'm not sure how long this is going to be, but here we go. Honestly, I'm not sure how long this has been going on, but the first time I bore witness to these events was in the fall of 2000. I was driving to work that morning like any other. I believe it was October 1st, and after reporting in, I made my rounds around the park. I was supposed to do a morning cleanup, check for trash, make sure things are working, that sort of thing. That's all well, good, but at around 9 of this morning, I began to hear the cries of a baby. Confused and obviously concerned, I walked towards the sound of the crying. The closer I got, the louder the sounds got until I finally stood a few feet from the edge of the lake. At the lake's edge was someone in a black dress, back to me. I stepped closer and remember feeling a bit sick. Something wasn't right. And so I did the only thing I knew to do. I asked if everything was all right. There was no response, only louder cries of a baby. I asked once again if things were okay. Still no response, and so I approached the figure. The closer I got to her, the more nauseous I became. I was hearing that baby cry louder, but now it sounded as though it was in my own head. This, in turn, changed. It became the cries of more children. I was just about to reach the woman in the black dress when I grew dizzy, and suddenly she vanished and it was daylight. I was wandering out on the lake at around 9 in the morning when I heard this baby's crying. Now, it was suddenly 11 a.m., and another ranger, Jack, was tapping me on the shoulder, asking me if I'm alright. I told him I'm fine, but in truth, I wasn't sure what to think. Jack asked me why I was staring out at the lake. He claimed I'd been doing so since he showed up at around 10:30. I told him I was lost in the beauty of the lake. I made up some mumbo-jumbo about appreciating the view and enjoying these sorts of sights in life, as life can be short. He laughed and said he was glad I was okay, as he was worried. I didn't speak to him about what was really going on, as I didn't understand it myself. The rest of the day was normal, though. I clocked out and headed home at around noon. Fast forward to that night. I'm laying there sleeping. While sleeping, I'm taken back to the lake in my dreams. The woman in the black dress is standing, her back to me once again, while a baby cries somewhere near the lake. I assume she must be holding a child, maybe? But I never saw for sure. Just as in the situation itself, I would get close, become nauseous, grow dizzy, hear the cries of an innumerable amount of children, and then I was awake in a sweat. I looked at my watch and it was 11 p.m. I took a moment to breathe and pondered what the hell was going on. I looked up for a moment, and in the mirror on my wall, I swear I saw the woman in the black dress, back turned towards me, and the lake, but then I rubbed my eyes and saw nothing but my own reflection again. I didn't sleep the remainder of the night, and left for work again at about 3 a.m. Mind you, the park doesn't officially open until around 8:30 during the fall, but I wanted to check out the lake. I arrived at work at around 3:30 in the morning, and began looking around the grounds. It was when I neared the same spot on the lake I saw the woman in black once again. Her back turned toward me, the crying of a child. I tried to move closer, but the sound of the child's crying was overbearing. Suddenly, I felt myself crying. I wasn't sure why, but it was sudden and as though the child's sorrow were my own. This was when it got weird. I go to brush the tears from my eyes, and suddenly I notice my tears are not tears. I'm bleeding from my eyes. Freaked out, I fall back on the ground, and suddenly, it's daylight. Jack is there again, calling my name. He tells me it's 8:30 and I should probably clock in. I turn towards him, shaking a bit when he asks if I'm okay. I recollect myself, feeling my face and noticing no tears or blood. I then smile and tell him I'm okay. I just didn't sleep much last night. I head back to the main office and clock in when my radio crackles to life. It's Jack. He tells me I better come over quickly. I rush over, and when I get there, he's holding on to something in a towel. Suddenly, the police are there, and when I see what he's holding, it's a dead baby. The child looks as though they drowned. I see the flash of the woman, and then I'm back to present day. The next while is a bit of a blur. The police questioned me, and I wasn't sure what to say. I wound up telling them I hadn't seen anything. I mean, I hadn't in a way. I certainly didn't see a dead child washing up from the lake. Shaken, I return home. We closed the next few days while the police ran their investigation. The child was a woman named Tamara Harper. She was found later on, drowned in the lake as well. The police ruled it a suicide, and Tamara had postpartum depression, which drove her to murder-suicide. That seemed like that. I couldn't make sense of it though. Why would I have been seeing that? Was it a sort of premonition? Is that even a real thing? I was off a bit the next few days of work, but I recollected myself and things seemed fine till the 15th. The night of the 14th I had horrid dreams. I saw the woman in the black dress. I heard children crying, and I woke up in a sweat at around 2 in the morning. All that entered my mind is that another mother may be drowning her child. I drove to work and cased the ground until it was time to clock in at 8:30. I saw nothing. No one was around. Nothing was out of the ordinary at all. The lake had been silent, and things seemed to be okay. The rest of the day was completely uneventful. It was the morning of the 18th when I awoke to a call on my day off to come down to the lake. There was another mother and child drowned. The news was shocking, and we closed the park again. The investigation was quick and we reopened the park by Monday the 21st. The park asked for volunteers to walk the grounds at night. I volunteered to take the first night. I spent the night on the 21st walking the grounds and searching. Nothing happened. In the morning, I head to my truck and go to get some shut-eye. I have another dream. I'm at the lake. Much of the events occur as they typically do in these dreams. There's the woman in black, back to me. The baby crying. There's the sound of thunder this time. The rushing of the wind and the rain begins. The rain isn't normal. I can hear the baby's cries. I see lightning up in the night sky. As I look above, I notice how the rain is blood. The lake is now red, and the sky is red as well. I'm overcome with the crying of children, and just as it's about to overwhelm me completely, I see the woman in the black dress turn my way. Her tears are black. Her face is shockingly familiar. One of our rangers, Annalise Sanders, was recently a mom. She'd been off work while she raised her 3-month-old. I freaked out as the woman's face began distorting and she turned away. I hear a burst of dark laughter. It is female, but I've never heard it in the past. I shoot awake and rush towards the park. I notice it's about 2 in the morning and I'm trying to call Anna over and over again, with no response. I just keep getting her voicemail. I'm panicking by the time I get to the park. I quickly head towards the spot on the lake that we always find the bodies at. That's when I see Jack, passed out on the ground. I wake up and he explains he isn't sure what happened. He was just suddenly tired, then all of a sudden, he just fell, I guess. I then rushed towards the waters of the lake and reeled back in horror as Anna Lee is floating, face towards the sky, wrist slit in the waters. Then, well, her child Leanne was... It's okay. Take your time. I'm not even sure how to say it or if I should. The child, the innocent baby girl, wasn't whole. She was in the water in pieces. It made no sense. It makes no sense. Anna Lee was a happy woman. She was no murderer. She certainly wouldn't do such an evil act to herself or her child, but damn well not to her child. If that wasn't bad enough, things got worse. The park was closed indefinitely for a time. Signs were put up warning visitors not to commit suicide there. The lake itself was beginning to draw murder-suicides. The news and the police investigation confirmed that Anna Lee chopped up her baby with an axe before laying in the lake and slitting her wrists. Do you even want to know what's even more messed up about it all? She was smiling while she was floating in the water. Smiling. It didn't make sense and it didn't add up. On October 30th, I was sorting through my mail when I found an unaddressed handwritten letter, and it said, "The sky bleeds their sorrow. The sky sees their pain. It understands the suffering of innocence. The lake bleeds away, a sign of their end. The red, a sign of future's trend. The blood of the innocents won't soon end. It bleeds their sorrows." I immediately called up the police and they came down and checked it out, but they couldn't tell me where it came from or who sent it. I slept that night uncomfortably, to say the least. I was at that godforsaken lake again. The woman in black had her head turned back to me once more. Babies cried, but no nausea overcame me as I got close. I soon arrived next to see the woman to see a child in hand. I couldn't see her face this time. I did, however, hear her laughter. A peal of laughter that soon resonated from all around the lake. I saw many women. Some I recognized, some I did not, all standing in black dresses, smiles on their faces. I heard the sound of gunfire, one by one as they blew out their brains. I heard the bodies fall, and one after the next. I woke screaming. I called the police in the park and I floored it to the lake. By the time I arrived, it was too late. It was about 2 a.m., Halloween morning, and I arrived to find hundreds of bodies floating in the blood-colored lake. Babies and mothers all dead. I was in tears, at a loss, and in a daze. The police questioned me. I tried to explain the dreams I had and everything leading up to that point. They wound up drug testing me. I was obviously clean. They weren't sure what to think of my story after that, but I was ruled out as a suspect. They closed the park for a remainder of the year. Nothing else happened that year. There were no more murder-suicides, no more deaths at the park in any way. January rolled up and around and the lake was frozen. I went back to work. No one discussed with me my story to the police or even brought the subject up. You could tell they wanted just to continue on as though nothing had changed. In some ways, I was grateful no one brought up the subject of the deaths or my story to the police. In other ways, I was sick at the thought of trying to pretend everything was normal. We'd put up signs and hired a regular security detail around the lake at nights. Everything was normal except for when I'd go by the lake. I'd see the innocent and senseless deaths, and I could hear the babies' cries of sadness. I was sure this wasn't actually happening. The memories of the events were still very much there in my mind and fresh. The sounds and emotions from it all echoed like a ghost in its own right. Fast forward to the 3 a.m. October 1st, 2001, I slept that night like any other, but was awoken to a phone call. The night security officer was found dead. She hung herself from a tree just outside the lake, and there was no baby involved in this death. or so we thought, but someone camping said they called the police as they heard someone screaming and crying. Carved beneath the body, at the same tree that the security guard hung herself from, was a poem. I saw their pain. I heard their cries. I felt their deaths. She slowly took their lives. She is a devil. She lives upon the lake, the woman in black, a devil in waiting. It would later come out that the carving was done by the security officer just before she hung herself. A fingernail was missing from her finger and had chipped off while she clawed the message into the wood. It was later found that the security guard was 2 months pregnant. They don't believe she was aware she was pregnant at the time. After these events, I asked my superiors if we could close the park again. They disagreed. At least, they did until the 4th of October rolled around. The night of October 4th would be the site of the largest mass suicide at the lake. I tried to sleep that night, but I slept poorly. I had a nightmare about the woman in black. The nightmare went as follows. I was at the lake and it was red. The woman in black stood at the lake's edge. She seemed to smile. Her eyes were black. Rain began, but it wasn't what you would expect. Instead of rain, I saw bodies falling from the sky. The bodies of babies, their moms smiling as they dropped in as well. The lake shook, and the woman in black stepped forward. Soon after she turned, she hovered above the center of the lake. A devilish smile crossed her lips. The woman held something wrapped in her arms. I assumed it was a baby as she sank under the red-stained lake. There was a laughter, so sinister it shook me awake. I woke to a message on my phone. The park was closed through October and would be closed every October on account of the most recent deaths. The news final number said there were 24 deaths that night. Mothers with children and future mothers carrying children inside. They came from all over the states. They were all murder-suicides. I felt sick to my stomach and wondered why. During my time off, I looked into ways that this could possibly have happened. I was convinced that whatever we were dealing with, it wasn't human. I contacted a priest and I had a long discussion with him. Eventually, I convinced him to come to the lake. I asked him to bless it, cleanse it, and do anything he could, and so he did. The remainder of the month, nothing happened. We reopened in November and things seemed fine. I remember feeling elation as another year went by, and into November of 2002 we had no deaths. No murder-suicides of any kind happened at the lake in that time span. My dreams were no longer torturing me, and I slept peacefully. Fast forward to October of 2003, we decided it was okay to reopen the park during October. We split shifts with ourselves and local law enforcement to be sure things were fine. It was a beautiful October. I was so happy as it went off without a hitch. Baraboo soon forgot the tragedies of the past. I was quite thankful for that. Things were normal and I even met someone. Her name was Evelyn, and I was smitten with her. We'd hit it off almost immediately. I'd begun to go to church more frequently since the blessing, and that's where I met her. It was October of 2004 when we got married. I felt like the luckiest guy alive. My job was great, the deaths had stopped, and I'd fallen in love, and now I was married to the woman of my dreams. Life couldn't have been more perfect, or so I thought. I wish this is where the story ended, but sadly, it isn't. It was March of 2005 and my woman and I had just gotten to the most amazing news. She was pregnant. I spoke with my bosses and was able to pick up some extra shifts. I wanted to be ready for our child's arrival. May of 2005, I got up in the middle of the night to use the restroom. Evelyn was sleeping and I went into the bathroom. I thought I heard laughter. It was only a split second's worth, so I shook it off. I soon washed my hands, and when I looked up to grab a towel, I saw the smiling face of the black woman. I jumped back for a second before rubbing my eyes and looking again. I studied the mirror for quite some time. I was terrified for a second, but eventually I laughed to myself, assuming I was just seeing things, as I was still half asleep. I went back to sleep and woke up later that morning to head to work. I had arrived at work and was heading toward my desk when I saw a red eye on it. It looked as though it was written in blood. I was the second person in that day, and I asked Jack if he had noticed my desk. He said no, as he'd pretty much clocked in and headed out and was only just now getting back to the office. I showed him the eye, and underneath was also a message. The message was 2 words: always watching. This unnerved me, and when we had the police come down, they discovered it was written in deer's blood. We had the police take the desk and soon moved and order one from the storage into my office. I tried not to think about what had happened or jump to conclusions as I filled out my paperwork and then went out to check around the park. Stepping inside, I found myself with this odd need to go to the lake. I walked that way and back to the spot where the security officer had hung herself years ago. I'm staring out at the lake when I suddenly see her hanging from the tree. It happens quickly. I'd say as quickly as one might blink. Because of the nature of what happened, I thought maybe the desk thing and being around the area was making my PTSD act up from years of events. I had been doing great. I'd been seeing a therapist, I'd quit drinking, and as time had gone on, I'd occasionally have an episode. I was mostly at peace with the situations of the past, though. They'd happened and I knew I needed to move forward. Going to church more and more often and meeting Evelyn really helped me get past the weird stuff that happened a few years prior. So again, I just thought this was a minor episode and decided I'd head back to the office. The moment I turned around, I hear a baby crying and I'm taken aback by it. I spin around and see nothing. The trees blew in a light breeze and the lake seemed mostly unsettled. I headed back to the office and spent the rest of the day doing paperwork, and that was that. The early morning hours of August 1st, I was sleeping for work when I had a dream. In it, Evelyn was crying. There was so much blood. I saw that the devil in black was there too, that horrid witch. She stood there laughing. She walked into the mirror's reflection before fading entirely. I woke up to the sound of baby crying. I was sweating and screaming. Evelyn woke up and we spent from about 2 to 4 in the morning talking about my dream. She assured me everything was fine. I felt her belly, and that day we scheduled a checkup for my wife just to be sure. The doctor's visit was reassuring. They said that she was perfectly fine and our soon-to-be baby boy was healthy. My mind at ease, I volunteered to look over the park overnight. My wife called me at about 4 in the morning to check up on me, claiming she couldn't get back to sleep and she just wanted to talk. As I'm walking the grounds, we talk some more. She eventually tells me she had a dream about an angel in black. She said she couldn't see his face, but she felt comfort while around her. I asked her what the angel wore, and she told me she had a long black dress. I grew cold with terror and asked her if everything seemed okay. She said yes, everything was fine. Shortly after, she told me she loved me and then that she was going to try to get some sleep. After she hung up, I felt a cold sweat over my brow. It couldn't be, right? I shook my head and tried to brush this off. My wife didn't seem concerned, so why should I, right? I went back to my office and clocked out. I was walking out of the office when Jack showed up. He greeted me and asked if I noticed anything strange going on while watching over the park. I told him no and asked why he asked. He shook his head and explained on his way he noticed a sign that had another red eye painted over it. It was dry, and he would take care of it and didn't want to bother me too much. I told him to call the police and he did, and on my way out I noticed the eye. Under it were the words, "Always watching." This made me feel unnerved, and upon driving home I talked to my wife. This was where I began to think something was really off. My wife greeted me happily. She seemed well rested and offered to make us some breakfast. I accepted, and when I spoke to her about what happened, she smiled and said, "Sure, everything's fine." Evelyn then went on to say it was probably just kids trying to be creepy. I explained the first time it was in deer's blood and it was likely the eye was painted in something similar. What kid do you know that is normal is going to kill a deer just to use its blood to spook people? Evelyn looked me in the eyes and smiled. "It's fine. I'm sure of it." There was a moment during that conversation, just after she reassured me it's fine, that I thought I heard laughter. Again, I brushed it off and said, "You're probably right." I thought maybe I was just spooked. I mean, I definitely was unnerved at the thought of everything happening. It gets worse when I'm at work the next morning, though. I was working on installing a new sign when it hit me. I had gone over my dreams previously with Evelyn. She knew this woman in black looked like, so if the woman in her dream was the same that I had seen before, the deaths and in my dreams, why wasn't she worried? I took a quick break. I had to call my wife. I confronted her about the dreams, but she claimed it wasn't the same woman. She claimed this woman had a warm air about her, and she was always comforting. I nodded and took a breath. I apologized for my worry, but Evelyn laughed and said it was okay. She was happy to have a husband who was concerned for her and also our future child. Hanging up, I went about the day normal. Everything was fine. I had heard some things around the lake that were a bit off, but I figured I was just stressed from my previous worry over my wife and child. The rest of August went fine. September came and went, and by October I was keeping a close eye on my now 7th-month pregnant wife. Halloween was tomorrow, and I wanted to be sure she was well rested before I headed off to work. I was going to watch over the park again. Though no real deaths had occurred for quite some time, we still wanted to take every precaution. Besides, if we could, we wanted to also catch the vandal who kept leaving the eyes on trees and around the park. That night was the night things began to change for me. It was the saddest night of my life. It was 12:04 a.m. Halloween morning when my radio came to life. On the other end was my wife's voice, and she was crying. I asked her why she was out here and if everything was okay. She said she wanted to check on me, but she didn't see me around the office. She decided to head to the lake. This was the point where her entire demeanor changed. The pain in her voice was no longer there, and she sounded at peace. Evelyn said, "It'll be all right, James. He'll be at peace, in heaven." The radio went dead and I immediately bolted to the lake. I'd never run so fast, but upon my arrival, I felt sick. My wife was standing at the edge of the lake and my vision was blurring in and out. I heard cries of children. I ran forward and I was quickly overcome with a searing pain in my gut. I looked up and saw my wife smiling as she pointed towards the lake, and I heard her asking me if I could see the angel. I looked ahead and there she stood in the center of the lake, the woman in black. I cried out to Evelyn, telling her to stay with me. She smiled and said it would be okay. We'd meet again in heaven someday. I screamed in horror and tried to call the police. I couldn't stand from the pain, and I was oh my God. I was in so much pain I could not stand, and it was so hard to even try to get my phone to work, and this battery was being drained by whatever force was around me. The most horrific sound of babies crying continued rattling within my mind. Slowly, my wife began to walk towards the lake. I tried to stand, but every time the thought crossed my mind, I felt a clawing from inside my gut. I was horrified at what I was witnessing and how helpless I was. I screamed for help, but no one seemed to come. I was desperate and alone. All I could do was watch as my wife's feet touched the water. I watched as she waded through the water. I saw her turn her head around when she was chest high. I watched her pull out a knife, smiling one final time before the gutting began. I was overcome with sounds of a single child's cry. I'm quite sure it was the sound of my would-be son, as his mother stabbed him. My wife continued stabbing, and she smiled as she died. Eventually she plunged the knife and pulled up this time, cutting her belly completely open. I felt myself unable to stand, and I ran toward the waters of the lake. The cries of my child that previously resonated within my mind fell silent as I watched my wife slit her throat, then fall over dead. I remember holding her lifeless body in the lake. Most of the rest of everything was a blur that day. Police questioned me. I took a ton of time off work. I tried to continue months later, but I just couldn't. I quit in the end. I couldn't handle the grief, and I just found other work. I became a facilities guy at a local school a few towns away. I enjoyed the peace, and I enjoyed being nowhere near a lake. The people in the area didn't bother me about the lake, and I'm still sad to this day. I know internally I'll always be alone. I'll never forget about the devil on the lake it roamed. Sometimes I still have nightmares of her and my wife. I wake up crying, but I've never seen her in waking life since. I had a dream once where my wife and child reassured me it'd be okay. They looked so at peace. I couldn't help but feel comfort by this. That was until my wife said, "Don't worry, my love. We'll meet in heaven someday."
I followed up on this story in the police of Baraboo, and they're still at a loss. They inform me that the park remains open to this day, and while at times there are odd deaths, the activity is greatly lessened. They had the waters blessed once again, and it's his custom now for them to do so at least once a year. James still works at a local school in another town, but for his privacy, we won't divulge where. Our hearts go out to him and his family. If you're listening to this, James, we're very sorry for your loss. I do not wish to be so insensitive, so that's why I took a pause. But moving forward, we have some updates and news. Most notably, the updates come from our next stop, Bienville. Anyone who's been listening to this podcast or following happenings around there is quite familiar with this place. The update is simply to report that the forest seems to have fully regrown. This makes little to no sense and is one of the many things that we plan to investigate the next episode. That's right, friends, we are finally making it to Bienville ourselves for the next episode of this podcast. We plan to do some interviews of the latest goings around this strange town, as well as do our own investigating into what is going on within the forest itself. How has it grown so quickly? Does a certain devil still lurk within it? What is up with the mirrors as of late within the town? For those new to the podcast or simply need a refresher, people have been reporting a woman in a mirror as of late. I've got more info that suggests this leading to strange death and mysterious disappearances. What could possibly be going on out there? Here are my final thoughts tonight. Tonight we listen to the case of a ranger named James. Because of the dark nature of the case and length, I decided to make it the only case for this episode. Why did so many mothers commit murder-suicide with their children? Was the land cursed? Is there really some sort of devil or witch out there influencing these women to commit these acts? If that's the case, how do you explain the mass murder-suicide event that led to people coming from out of state coming into town to commit such tragedies? Yes, some out-of-towners were simply visiting, but there were a few that actually just came to the lake minutes before they committed their horrific act. This, in my opinion, suggests that whoever or whatever is causing these things clearly has reached beyond the town itself. Then again, perhaps a case of news spreading and everyone seeing this as a suicide lake. I believe the former seems more likely, however, as the further I dig into these things around this case, the more it seems something is truly reaching these people and causing them to commit horrible crimes. Too many of these women were just perfectly happy prior to their murder-suicides. Add to that Evelyn, who clearly was a happy, expectant mother. She and James had a perfectly happy life, until the tragic end. James was more excited than ever about becoming a father and finally somewhat moved on from his past experiences. Then there's the final part of this case I'd like to note. The eye has made another return. I don't take this lightly and refuse to brush this off at this point. This eye has appeared in 3 cases that we've spoken on up to this point. I've looked into other sightings and it has appeared in quite a few others which we will be hopefully addressing in future podcasts. What is up with the eye? What is its connection to the case it's in? Is it some kind of occult symbol? Is there something more to it? I get chills just thinking about the eerie nature of its continued appearance. What is with the eye? Anyway, I'm John Billigan, and I'd like to say thank you to all our listeners for your continued viewership, support, and your patience. I know there are parts where we have gone a while between episodes, but the truth is it takes some time to put everything together, and in some cases, travel affects these things as well. Thank you so much, and we look forward to reaching you from Bienville, next episode of the Creep Factor podcast. I'm John Billigan, and I'm signing off. Till next time.